Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. I'm Nick Pellavita. I'll be your host for today's presentation, and we're going to be looking at the Social Security Fairness Act that just got passed by Congress. It looks like Biden's going to sign it, and it looks like it's going to create another $200 billion of debt in the Social Security system. In other words, blow a big hole. Is it fair? Is it not? And how are we going to cover the $200 billion? All those questions are not answered by Congress, so we're going to go to the former Comptroller General of the United States, the Honorable David M. Walker, to give us some insight on this. David, I don't know if you saw this act that just got passed by Congress last minute, end of the year, Social Security, quote, Fairness Act. And from my reading and understanding, that it's going to put Social Security another $200 billion in the hole and bring up the time it becomes insolvent 6 more months earlier than need to be. There was nothing said about how we're going to correct the problem, the actual underfunding issues of Social Security. In other words, it's just like it did look like there were some unfair situations that were out there. I mean, I can see that, but it also looked like there were some new unfair situations to taxpayers that are going to take place. So, David, since you were involved in this, can you give us some insight on Social Security Fairness Act?
Well, first, Nick, this is just another example that truth in advertising laws don't apply to Congress. You end up naming a bill, the Social Security Fairness Act, and the question is, fair to whom? You also have other bills like the Inflation Reduction Act, which was clearly improperly named, and I can go on and give you others if you want. But look here, let me give you a few facts here, some of which is a reinforcement of what you've said, and then some additional information. Social Security is in a situation where its so-called trust fund is going to be exhausted in 2033. That's for the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Fund. And if it becomes exhausted in that year, then benefits will be cut across the board 21%. And nothing has been done about that, and something needs to be done about that. And this quote-unquote Social Security Fairness Act will end up accelerating that exhaustion date about 6 months. It is estimated to cost about $200 billion over a 10-year period. Clearly, nothing was done to try to offset that cost. And when you talk about fairness to whom? I mean, this is basically a correction in the formula that is used to calculate benefits for individuals who, for a portion of their career, were not covered by Social Security. Well, by not being covered by Social Security, it means neither they nor their employer paid payroll taxes during the period of time that they weren't covered. And this overwhelmingly relates to public sector employees. Public sector meaning state and local government, and then federal government workers that worked before, that were employees before 1984. Well, now, why were they not covered? Well, first, they were exempted. But one of the reasons they were exempted is because public sector workers have by far the best pension and retiree health care benefits of any sector of the economy. And so, in effect, what's happening here is that we're spending another $200 billion. We're accelerating the date of exhaustion for Social Security by 6 months to be able to provide additional benefits for state and local workers and certain federal workers who already have much better pension and retiree health care benefits than other sectors of the economy, who didn't pay taxes during the period of time, payroll taxes, nor did their employer during the period of time that they earned the wages during the time. And so, it also shows the power of public sector unions. The biggest portion of any sector of the economy that's unionized is the government, public sector. They are very, very powerful. And it also shows the lack of fiscal responsibility on behalf of this and many other Congresses in recent years. Based upon what I know, I would have voted no. And as you know, I used to be a one of two public trustees for Social Security and Medicare, and I'm very, very frustrated that neither the Congress nor the president-elect has recognized the reality that doing nothing for Social Security is not an option. Doing nothing means that benefits will be cut across the board 21% and increasing over time, starting in 2033, absent some other actions. And that's just irresponsible. And so hopefully that will change. But that's where we are right now.
Yeah, but I did read there was some inequitable situations where a husband would be paying into Social Security, wife would work for the state, husband dies, and all of a sudden the spouse gets no Social Security benefits. How do you deal with these inequitable situations like that?
Well, there could be some circumstances in which there is a real inequity. Unfortunately, it wasn't targeted that way. It covered far more situations than the one that you described, and that unfortunately is the case, in many pieces of legislation. The other thing, Nick, that you have to keep in mind is, look, I support the police, fire, public sector workers, all right? But the fact is that, you need to be much more targeted in trying to deal with truly inequitable situations. This went far beyond truly inequitable situations. I'll give you another analogy that is frustrating, and that is, some people say, well, you've got to spend more on defense or else you're soft on national security. On the other hand, some people say, well, we need to cut defense, and then people argue, well, they're soft on national security. The truth is a heck of a lot of waste in the Pentagon budget. And we need to be cutting a lot of the overhead. We need to be modifying, our footprint, our force structure, and our platforms to recognize the reality of current and future threats rather than old threats. And that could end up meaning we end up spending less money, but having, frankly, better national security. So you just can't look at the top line. You have to lift the hood, as Ross Perot would say, and start looking underneath. What's working, what's not working, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, where should we be doing more, where should we be doing less, and where should we just flat eliminate?
Rick? The other thing I found interesting about the fairness bill, and I agree the misnomer. First of all, the Inflation Reduction Act was probably the biggest cause of inflation in the United States. It's a complete lie. And frankly, I don't know when Americans are going to get tired of Congress just lying to them by, creating an act called the Inflation Reduction Act when all it did was create inflation. So Fairness Act, all I can think is another lie coming out of Congress. But here's the important part. And I'm wondering, and you brought this up several times, political will. When I looked at the vote in the Senate and the House, it was almost overwhelming to put the Fairness Act in place and put us $200 billion more in the hole, and nothing as to how you're going to get out of the hole. So it seems to me it's easier to spend money than it is to make money. And there's no political will at all to stop the Social Security juggernaut. So how are we going to deal with this when there's no will in Congress to do anything about this?
Well, I'll come back to what I've said before. The only thing that can bind current and future Congresses to be able to make tough choices to put our finances in order is a constitutional amendment. And I support an approach that focuses on debt to GDP because it is a pro-growth approach that says that if you grow the denominator faster than the numerator, even if the numerator is going up, you're making progress. On the other hand, right now we're growing the numerator much faster than the denominator. It's scheduled to get worse. And so it would require Congress to make tough choices, but it doesn't tell them how much of the choice has to be through mandatory spending reductions, discretionary spending reductions, or revenue increases. But it just says you have to do it. Right now, they continue to mortgage our future at record rates, which is irresponsible, inequitable, immoral, and it needs to stop.
Yeah, but it looks like it's bipartisan.
It is. There's not a party of fiscal responsibility. There hasn't been
both parties are responsible, so
right.
it's like,
That's correct. That's correct.
yeah, Rick.
So help me understand this, because in California, public school teachers have a pension through the state government that is roughly equivalent to whatever salary you were making your last year of teaching is roughly what you're going to get every year in a pension. So it's pretty much the same for cops. So, but you don't get Social Security because you've got this huge pension. So now we're going to give them Social Security on top of this huge pension. What's the deal?
Well, the deal, as I understand it, Rick, is first, an individual has to have had at least 40 quarters or 10 years of earnings in order to get anything under Social Security. Okay. So if they never worked for a covered employer, okay, where they were covered under Social Security, they're not going to get anything. But for people who worked part of their career under covered employment and part of their career under non-covered employment, and you give good examples, teachers.
And those are non-covered. Is that
those are non-covered? They're not covered by Social Security. And one of the reasons, which you put your finger right on it, Rick, okay, one of the reasons why you have 190 IQ, okay, is because the pension benefits and retiree health care benefits of public sector workers in general are clearly superior to the private sector. You talked about an example of where they're basically making the same thing when they retire than when they were working. I don't know of any private sector plan on the planet where you make the same amount of money when you retire than you're working. And so you make good points.
Okay.
And you're right, they actually don't. In the defined benefit world where I work in, only 8% of the population are covered by pension plans, David. So it's decreased from, it used to be like 30, 40%. So now it's down to 8%. So if you work in private industry, good chance you'll never retire. If you work in public industry, good chance you will retire. So they actually do have a better system.
It's not just the 8%, Nick, which you point out has declined dramatically from what it used to be, okay? But very, very few private sector pension plans of the ones that exist have automatic COLAs, whereas most of the government plans have automatic COLAs. In addition, if you looked at what percentage of private sector employers have retiree healthcare plans, it would be less than 8%, whereas in the public sector, it is a very high percentage. I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but it's a very high percentage.
Right. Yeah. So the fairness to the private employers doesn't exist. This is all public. How much of this was political? Because it was done right at the end of Joe Biden's term. In other words, there's no opportunity to stop it. It looks like this thing's going to go through. Biden will sign it, obviously. And,
Biden will sign it. Well, look, who's going to vote against a Social Security Fairness Act if you don't read it and you don't understand what it really does and what it doesn't do? And as I said at the outset of this, fairness to whom?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fairness to if you're working in public, if you're working for the public industry, it's fair. But if you're working in private industry, you're never going to be able to retire. And certainly the 401k is not going to get you there. So as I continue to run the numbers, I go, the people that are working today, just frankly, they're going to work until they die. That's my analysis.
Should we talk about how pension funds over the past 30 years have been raided by corporate raiders that do come in and they buy a company and they strip it of assets? And a pension fund is a multi-billion-dollar asset for a huge company, and they turn that into value for shareholders, and then they sell their shares, they leave, and they leave the wreckage of a company, and they leave thousands of employees without pensions.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, okay? Rick, as you may know, my first government position was with the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, where I started out as the Deputy Executive Director for Insurance Programs, and then after that, I was Chief Negotiator and Acting Executive Director of the PBGC before I went to the Labor Department. That was in the 80s, okay? And we had a real dichotomy in the mid and late 80s. On one hand, because interest rates were so high, you could end up buying out your liabilities from insurance companies by purchasing annuities at a discounted rate as compared to what historically had been the case. And therefore, you had a lot of employers that had overfunded plans. They had way more assets than they needed in order to discharge their obligations. And the way the pension laws work is if you want to terminate your plan, you have to satisfy all your accrued obligations. The way to do that is to buy annuity contracts, all right? And so you had a lot of employers that were terminating their plans in order to gain the excess assets and annuitizing the liabilities, if you will. Now, in some cases, those liabilities were annuitized with a company by the name called Executive Life, which subsequently went bankrupt, which I won't go into now unless you want to. At the same point in time, you had certain other industries, steel, autos, airlines, as an example, heavy equipment manufacturing, that had significantly underfunded plans. And so they were terminating their plans and dumping the unfunded obligations on the PBGC. But since then, in the late 80s, the accounting rules changed. The accounting rules changed both for pensions, defined benefit pension plans, and for retiree healthcare plans. And as a result of those accounting rule changes, as well as the preferences of individuals to have more control over their pension, the individual accounts and investment, you had a lot of employers get out of the defined benefit business and they went into the defined contribution business, whether it be 401k or whatever, right? And you had a vast majority of private sector employees get out of the retiree healthcare business altogether because they realized for the first time the huge obligation that they had created, and they couldn't afford it and they couldn't sustain it. And so they just terminated the plan altogether. In many cases, the people that terminated the defined benefit plan created a successor defined contribution plan. In some cases, they tried to create a successor defined benefit plan, which they could under very limited circumstances, but most went to defined contribution plans because they didn't like the accounting treatment. They didn't want to have the investment risk associated with it, et cetera. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
All right, so we go on to the Writers Guild, and every year we get a report on the financial health of our pension. And we're always in the green light area, even through the various crashes we've had. But that's because writers periodically go on strike and go back to the well and say, you producers are making billions and billions, and we deserve fair compensation. And we just had a strike a year ago, and we won some concessions. And but what the producers have since done is, okay, yeah, we gave you the concessions, but we're just not going to make any productions. And so suck on that. Like, production is down in LA by 40% because the producers are like, screw you guys. We're just, we have to pay benefits. When we hire you, we're just not going to hire anybody.
Well, you may have, Rick, and I'm not sure, and you may not know either, you may have what's called a multi-employer plan, which means that it's a plan that jointly trusteed by companies and union people, because you end up not working for the same employer all the time. You end up working for different kinds of people. And those plans, they are insured by the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, but on a different basis. They're insured if they become insolvent rather than if they terminate. And by the way, the multi-employer fund was bailed out to the tune of tens of billions of dollars by the Congress in recent years, which means the taxpayers paid for it.
Well, so here's what happens. Say you got a good writing job. You're getting paid $4,000 a week. It's a guild job, a union job. So you get paid $4,000, but your employer has to write another check for $800 that goes to your pension and health.
Right. No, that's not. It's probably a multi-employer plan. That's how it is. And I have two brothers. Okay, one of which is a retired lawyer and worked primarily in the private or not-for-profit sector of his career, one of which is a retired first responder, and he gets his pension through the state. And he always gets worried about his pension security. And I tell him, look, when you're looking at your pension, you have to look at several things. One, what's the financial viability of the sponsor? In this particular case, it's the state of Florida, and the state of Florida is in good shape. Okay. Secondly, what is the funding status of the plan? How well funded is it as compared to its accrued obligations? In this particular case, it's well funded. And then thirdly, what's the asset allocation of the plan? In other words, how much risk is there associated with the assets, if you will? In this particular case, it's well diversified. So I tell them, don't worry. Okay. On the other hand, if you have a plan that's underfunded, that doesn't have an asset allocation for an employee that's not good financial shape, you got a problem. And then the real question is it insured by the PBGC? Only defined benefit plans are, and only one overwhelmingly private sector plans, and only up to a certain level. So, like for example, if you're an airline pilot and your airline company goes under, which a lot of them did, within the last 20 years, then you're going to get a big haircut as compared to a lower level employee.
You can see the success of the Writers Guild plan when you go to Writers Guild events. You have a lot of really old people, and they're able to be old, because writing tends not to kill you. You don't get blown up. You don't fall off a building when you're a writer. And so you're not killed by your job, and your pension keeps you alive. My health plan has literally saved my life.
Well, see, here's another example. Okay, you've got a very good health plan, right? I would imagine that your health plan's a lot better than most private sector workers or retirees. Oh, by the way, just for the record, I've given over 20 years of full or part-time service to the federal government, and I don't get a single dime of pension or retiree healthcare benefits from the federal government. Not a dime.
That kind of stinks.
Well, fairness to whom, right?
Fairness to whom.
Yeah.
Well, in my experience,
to the taxpayers. Fairness to the taxpayers.
Okay. My experience over 23 years in setting up more than 800 private pension plans. The ones that we set up are with insurance companies that have equity index annuities, fixed annuities, in which they're the most boring products in the world. But we haven't had any defaults or any problem, and frankly, haven't had any problems with it on the financial side because they're all have guarantees. What we have seen a problem with, and this is recent, is your friends at the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. Let me tell you what happened. For 20 of the 23 years, no problem with the PBGC, because if there was a minor error, they would correct it, we would correct it, we'd move on. Today, that's not the case. Today, if there's a minor error, there's a full-blown audit and a lawsuit filed in federal court. Now, and they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, why are they doing it? Here's the reason why. You're right, they were underfunded, about 20 billion. And then what happened was they were paid not 20 billion, but 80 billion by the federal government. So they have excess capital. What they're doing is they're attacking small plans. And so for that reason, I'm trying to tell our clients, you got to stay away from the PBGC. They're a pariah as we sit today. There's ways we can maneuver around the PBGC, but we can't completely stay away from it. So you took a good government agency and basically turned it into hellhole. And that's what it is today.
Can I respond to a Coolio wrote in with a comment saying the market for TV movie products, Coolio fan, was oversaturated, has had lesser rates of profitability. So the deal is 5 or 10 years ago, right before COVID, various streamers were trying to create a competitive moat. Like Netflix for a while owned the streaming market, and they wanted to keep it by just making a ton of entertainment. So whenever you thought, I'm going to be entertained, I'll just go straight to Netflix. But then other streamers came in trying to do the same thing, and they spent tens of billions of dollars on TV to try to build that moat just as COVID came along, and we really needed all that entertainment because we were locked in our houses, and it was great. And yeah, since the streamers, I think, have realized, yeah, they're not going to have a competitive mode. We got to quit spending all this money. And so, yeah, it's a leaner production market right now.
Talking about pensions for a second, Nick, I want to come back to annuities. I actually do have several annuity products, but I think one of the things that people need to be concerned about is, when you have an annuity product that is a lifetime stream of income, which means it goes out for many, many years, you really need to be cautious about the financial viability of that insurance company. And I can tell you that I have not had a good experience with the rating agencies in rating either insurance companies or government entities, because I've had an experience in the past where I went up to New York and talked to several of the rating agencies. And what they told me was they're really just looking out about 5 to 7 years. And does the insurance company have the ability to meet its obligations for the next 5 to 7 years? Well, that's fine if you're buying an investment product from an insurance company that has, that has a maturity of within 5 to 7 years, no problem. But if you're buying an annuity, or if you're receiving an annuity for lifetime income for retirement, that's clearly not adequate. When you consider that in combination with how private equity has now moved aggressively into the insurance market, because that's where the money. When you consider that in connection with a lot of offshore activity that's going on with regard to the insurance industry, the lack of transparency, the lack of adequate regulation, you find that you really need to do more due diligence with regard to buying an annuity product from an insurance company beyond what the traditional rating agencies do, because they don't consider a long enough horizon. They don't consider enough with regard to transparency and also related party transactions with regard to co-insurance schemes.
Can you talk about a couple things? One is in regard to annuities, it has to put stress on insurers if people don't die. If technology means that the average American starts living to 88, 90, that means they're getting an annuity for 12 extra years or something. And that's thing one. Thing two is how the post office got screwed by Congress deciding that they had to fund 75 years of pensions into the future.
Well, on the first, life expectancy in the United States has actually gone down a little bit.
With COVID, yeah, and obesity.
That's correct. It's actually gone down a little bit. Okay. And you're right. I mean, the insurance companies have to make a number of actuarial assumptions about how long they expect people to live. And to the extent that they're wrong on that, they can either be benefited or hurt because of the variance, if you will. On the Postal Service, the Postal Service's current business model is not sustainable. And I would respectfully suggest that one of the things that you may end up seeing with the new administration is an effort to potentially privatize the Postal Service, which has been done in other countries, including Germany. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying look at how much postal rates have gone up in the last 20 years as compared to inflation.
But there's still a great deal to mail a letter. I think it's still only like 70 cents.
Yeah. It was I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying. I remember testifying, Rick, when I was Comptroller General, we put the post office on the high risk list, the Postal Service on the high risk list. All right. And we added an asterisk, and the asterisk meant that Congress was part of the problem and Congress needed to be part of the solution. In other words, the executives at the Postal Service couldn't solve the problem by themselves. And I remember getting a call from the Postmaster General thanking me for putting them on the high risk list, not because they were on the high risk list, but because we publicly acknowledged that Congress was part of the problem and the solution. They're also an example of, I remember testifying when I put them on the high risk list, I held up a device like this, although it was a BlackBerry, okay? And I said, this is competition to the Postal Service. And I had a lot of members look at me because it was before 9/11. After 9/11, every member of Congress was issued a BlackBerry. Before that, very few had any type of electronic device. And I said, this is competition to the Postal Service. I said, what do you mean? I said, there's something on here called email.
Mm-hmm.
All right? And therefore, people are going to be able to communicate this way, and they're not going to have to buy a first-class stamp to mail a letter. Okay. So there's a long story here. I could also tell you that the Postal Service actually was paying FedEx to put FedEx boxes in the post offices. And I'm going, who's paying whom?
I prefer it stay public and maybe reduce some services. Maybe if you live in a rural area, maybe you only get mail 4 days a week. I buy some stuff from overseas, and boy, some of the postal services that are, like public-private combinations in other countries are not great and are hated by the people of that country. They've got.
Well, I think bottom line is that we need to take a look at it. That's one of the things that's been talked about. In certain areas, you deliver 5 days a week rather than 6 days a week, or 4 days a week rather than 6 days a week. The Postal Service is another example. They have way, way, way too many post offices, way too many.
Federal Express makes it, UPS makes it, DHL makes it.
Yeah, but if you want to ship something, like with you can send something priority mail for $8 with the Postal Service. If you want to ship something UPS, 3 days, it might cost you $50 if you're shipping.
That's part of the problem I've seen, Rick. Is the thing is it's poorly managed. They need to increase their prices, and they don't, and so they run a deficit, and then all of a sudden they say, well, we're a service, we're not for profit. I don't care. Don't be a for profit. Just don't lose money. But it's got to be one of the most mismanaged organizations in the world is the U.S. Postal Service that could easily be fixed by just managing it properly. You're right. I use U.S. Post Office because it's cheaper than FedEx or DHL or UPS. But at the same time, why is it cheaper? It's because taxpayers are paying for it.
It also, I can tell you from personal experience, in some cases, it takes an inordinate amount of time for the Postal Service to deliver something. I
agree. I don't use them all the time.
I mean, I've had
because of that. But getting back to pensions, most of our pension clients do not take the lifetime income. We plan to take the lifetime income, but we go to terminate. 99% will take the lump sum and roll it to the IRA. So we don't have long-term liability risk. Number two, in short-term liabilities, each annuity contract is guaranteed up to $250,000. Some states up to $1 million by each state. It varies on state-by-state insurance contract guarantees. So you can keep their pension solvent. We have not had a problem in 23 years on solvency because of the state insurance guarantee funds. The only problem that we've had, the major problem, is the U.S. government, and the recent one is the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, which is a private industry that's supposed to insure pensions and not attack pensions. And because of that, I'm just like livid right now with the PBGC and how they're operating, and they're using your taxpayer dollars to go after 2- and 3-person plans with a vengeance. And it's wrong. And as far as I'm concerned, defund the PBGC, because the other thing is what they do today, David. They support companies that are not being planned properly. It's just a bad organization. The sooner we get rid of it, the better.
Well, two things. One, let the record show that we didn't have those problems when I was at PBGC. Okay.
Problem in 20 years.
And two,
David, this is a recent.
No, I understand. I got you. The second thing is they are a government corporation. So they are within the government. They are a governmental entity. Kim, I like your hair.
Thank you, David. And are you doing better? Are you feeling better?
I've got a broken sternum, which is very painful, but and I've got a couple of cracked ribs, but I'm tough, so I'll be all right. I can basically
you're tough. You'll handle it. I did have a quick question for you and everything, David.
I wanted to bring up something. Were y'all talking about the Postal Service?
Yeah, we
Incidentally,
kind of got off track a little bit, but we did. Yeah.
No, but you do know that they are part of the Constitution, right? Like I've read this over the
Postmaster
weekend.
General's in there. Yeah.
Yeah, that it is a requirement for the people, that it so people can get the information that they need when they need. I guess supposedly at one point in time almost free, but for minimal cost, so that they can get their medications they need, so that they get services and information through the mail. It is a requirement by law. So I don't know that we can shut the postal service down, and I sure as heck would hate to see that become a private entity like some prisons. So I think it's important.
There are certain services that are required, but it doesn't necessarily specify how you achieve that. But I hear you. You're right.
Right. I mean, I was shocked to hear it was part of the Constitution. So just read about it. So
yeah, it's been part of the Constitution for a while. I mean, it's part of what was going on, even with some of the American Revolution and all along those lines. I did have a question for you about Social Security, and then I've got a question for everybody. Please just kind of teasing everybody along those lines and everything. But Social Security is definitely something that as you get older, you start thinking about. And even in my own family, I've hit that big age of 62 and everything last July, so 63 next year. And I've been thinking about possibly taking that early buyout and all along those lines. But I was just wondering, in your advice, was that something that would be a good thing to do, or should I wait until later? Because retirement for me, working in a nonprofit world, probably won't come till like closer to 70 or 75 and everything in that space. So I just wanted your thoughts around that, David, as one that's worked in that field.
I'll give you my opinion, okay?
Yes.
And my personal decision, okay? I think it depends in large part on several things. One, do you need the money? All right. Number two, what is your personal health? All right. And number three, what is based upon your family history?
Right.
How long do people tend to live in your family? Okay. In my case, I didn't need the money at 62. I didn't need the money until I took it. I took it at the latest possible date because I didn't need the money. I was in good health, and my family has a fairly long lifespan history. All right. For every year that you delay, you get 8% more in benefit. Okay. It's actuarially adjusted. All right. And in addition, Social Security is indexed to inflation. So you get a double benefit. You get more money, and the more money is indexed to inflation, right? So I ended up taking it as late as I could take it, which was 70. All right. The year 70. And I think that was a good decision for me. But look at those factors and make a decision based upon those factors.
The break-even
do the math.
The break-even point is 82. I think Kim will agree with me. If you think, based on everything, that you're going to live longer than 82, then you want to wait, because you'll get big. Say you're going to live to 90. Wait till you're 70. Get these big checks for 20 years. If you think you're only going to live to 78, then don't wait till 70. Start at 65. And get smaller checks, but get 13 years of them till you croak at 78.
There's a wonderful advisor. Yeah, go ahead.
Don't you have to put another factor in, and that is Social Security solvency, which we didn't have to put that factor in before, but now it's a serious factor. In other words, so if you tell them, hey, wait to your normal retirement age, then take it, then all of a sudden he takes it. And then by 2033, all the benefits are reduced 20%.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, that's not good.
Let's talk about that for a second. First, in my opinion, there's no way that they're not going to reform the Social Security program. They're not going to allow there to be a 21% cut across the board for everybody. That's the first thing, okay? And the history on that is back in 1983, where that almost happened in 1983, but at the last minute, they ended up making reforms, all right? Secondly, when they do make reforms, those reforms, in my opinion, are largely going to keep people that are in retirement or very close to retirement. They're not going to be affected to any significant extent. And that what's going to end up happening is that the younger you are and the better off you are financially, the more you're going to be affected. And so I think that, you're right. You need to consider the financial condition of the program, but I also think you need to consider how that relates to you as an individual. What's your financial situation? What's your age? What frustrates me about Social Security is most young people don't think they're going to get it at all, and they're wrong. And most seniors think that they're going to get taken advantage of. There are other words I could use, but I won't. Okay, and they're wrong. And so that gives us an opportunity to be able to reform the program, phasing in changes over time to exceed the expectation of every generation of Americans. I call that a win. And I'm saying, why aren't we moving ahead to try to get that done sooner rather than later so everybody can plan better, all right, and that we can put ourselves on a more prudent and sustainable path. So,
well, and talking about the sustainable path and all the money that we're losing, one of the conversations I wanted to discuss was all the checks going out to dead people. Senator John Kennedy did a pitch to Congress about this several years ago to at least get a temporary bill to fix the problem. And the biggest problem is Social Security gets the identity of majority of the deceased people, but they don't share that information with any other organizations. And currently, just one of the other organizations is, writing $1.6 billion in checks a year to people who are deceased. And that's just one. They have shown that there are over 60 million people that are over the age of 112 years old, or was it 120 years old. And these people are getting these checks, but they're not. There's not that many people living that long. We are living longer, but not that many. So there is a problem in our system. The Congress knows it. The senators who are pitching new bills starting back in 2018 or 19, they were pitching this, that we need to change the system. We got a temporary bill, which has expired to make the changes, but it was a temporary test, but they decided not to renew it. So, he's going to wait a year and now pitch it. But, that's another billions of dollars being wasted on dead people. One man received $872,000. He was dead.
well, did they cancel all the checks?
No, they're not canceling the checks.
No. Did they cash the check? If he's dead, who cashed?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. All of these checks, the billions of dollars, all of these checks not only have been written to deceased people, they have been cashed. So
Well,
the
I
one man
can
who
assure you, thank you. I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off. I can assure you this will be very, 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 very high on the list of Doge.
good,
Yeah.
because it should have been high for the last
Years ago.
8 years that they have
Totally
been
agree.
addressing it.
Totally agree.
I looked it up, and overpayments run to less than 1% of total benefits paid due to fraud.
But Rick, I think she's talking about something different. There's two issues. One issue is, to what extent do we have overpayments in Social Security? To what extent do we have overpayments in other federal programs? Because Social Security does not share death information with other government programs. And I think the problem is more with regard to the other government programs than it is Social Security.
So VA is one of them. Small business, actually, small business.
My solution is always AI. That you frickin' use all the new technology to make sure that I always watch movies, and in thriller movies, it's always all the bad stuff that happens because nobody shares information with each other. And that's the same in government and policing and everything. The more information you share, the better the agencies do.
A la 9/11. 2001.
Right. So like an FBI agent notices in some rural part of America, you have all these guys going to flight school and they're not learning how to take off or land.
They just didn't learn how to land. They learned how to take off, but not how to land.
Right. So like she's like, this is not good. She tells her bosses, that report dies someplace. You know, there were many opportunities, to shut down 9/11.
Okay, I have a question for David. I saw the Social Security Fairness Act of 2024, another $200 billion giveaway. What I didn't see is the Social Security Solvency Act of 2024. Why is it that Congress hasn't passed a Solvency Act? They quickly pass a giveaway act, but they don't pass a Solvency Act. They don't even discuss a Solvency Act. And everybody on this panel and most of the people in the United States knows this thing's going under. So why is it, are we that incompetent in Washington, D.C.?
Because Washington is a lag indicator. And elected officials don't like to make tough choices on things that might involve modifications in benefits and or increases in taxes unless they have to. So they tend to wait until there's a crisis that will give them cover. And let's look back to history. Reagan formed the Greenspan Commission, and the Greenspan Commission made recommendations to reform Social Security that were enacted into law, and it was virtually guaranteed they were going to be enacted into law within the time frame that they made their recommendations, because the trust fund was going to go to zero within months. And if the trust fund went to zero, under current law, you can only pay benefits out of trust fund assets, which means you would have had to cut everybody's benefits across the board. That was obviously inequitable. It's politically unacceptable because the most active voters in the United States are seniors. All right. And so that's not going to happen. So, as I said, I mean, the biggest deficit we have in Washington, D.C. is a leadership deficit. And the politicians underestimate the intelligence of the American people. They don't think the American people can handle the truth. They don't think they're willing to accept tough choices, and they're wrong. And I proved that in the 2012 10,000-mile, 27-state national fiscal responsibility bus tour. So what we need is leadership, and unfortunately, we didn't get it from either presidential candidates this time. I'm hoping that's going to change. It may change, and I'm hoping that it will change. But that's why, Nick.
Well, I think that the government also took advantage of the people because they know they don't have the time to address these issues because they're too busy trying to live a sustainable life, and they're struggling right now. And people don't have the time. I'm helping some people right now with a major issue and trying to get the system involved to help somebody who's disabled. And just to get the system to work, I've literally spent 3 weeks on this, 3 hours on Saturday on the phone and got nowhere. And today I was on the phone with the police officer who was kind of questioning, why haven't y'all done anything? Well, it's because we've tried. And so the system is flawed in many ways, but the biggest flaw is the amount of work that it expects people to do to get something done. And people just don't have the time. They just don't.
Yeah. But David, don't we have to also look to raise revenues on Social Security?
Yeah,
I mean, we have to look at ways they can bring in more money. And I haven't seen anything, I would say, by Congress about it's always cut expenses, cut expenses, cut expenses. That's the Republican way. Wonderful. Okay, but you also have to bring in money, bring in money, bring in money. And I've seen nothing on how
Nick, too, stop writing checks to dead people that are being cashed.
Well, that's
huge. That's billions and billions and billions of dollars.
That doesn't raise revenue. I mean, the thing is that just stops the bleeding.
That's not, but that becomes revenue. That's revenue back in your pocket that you didn't have.
Yeah, but when are we having a conversation about raising revenue?
Well, when
are we having a conversation about wealth inequality.
Well, sell
In the
Donald
United
Trump
States-
hats with his hair under it. That's a big thing in New York right now.
In the United States,
let me
1% have 43% of all the wealth in the country. 1% have 43%. We have some serious problems here.
Yeah,
We don't have wealth.
let me give you a brief executive summary of the type of reforms to Social Security that 77% of voters supported as part of that 10 million a minute tour in 2012. Okay. Number one, significantly increase the taxable wage-based cap, which right now is around 170,000. Let's say you double it to 340. That means it only affects people making from 170 to 340. Okay. Which obviously are more well-off people. Do not change the tax rate because the tax rate is very regressive. Most people pay more money in payroll taxes than income taxes. Secondly, change the benefit formula to provide a higher replacement rate for people near the poverty level and a lower replacement rate for upper middle income and upper income people. So you are making it a more progressive system, if you will. Thirdly, gradually increase the normal retirement age another couple of years over a 20-year period of time. Just gradually phase it in. Still allow people to retire as early as 62 if they want to, depending upon what their occupation is, with a modification of the benefit. All right. Number three, change the cost of living index to more reflect cost of living for seniors rather than the general population. In addition, modify the basis under which the assets in the trust fund can be invested to give them the ability to invest in assets other than U.S. government securities, which typically have a lower rate of return, which can end up providing more investment income to be able to make these promises. Those would be a combination, Nick, of both more revenues in the way of payroll taxes, somewhat less benefits over time, differentiated between lower income and higher income. Lower income would be somewhat better off and higher income would be somewhat worse off. And the ability to be able to earn a little bit better rate of return on invested assets. That got 77% support. And by the way, a lot of those reforms are very similar to what happened in 1983.
Yeah. Yeah. And so why hasn't this been discussed in the past?
One more thing.
I did briefly review this, and I agree with each one of them. A lot of people don't know the taxable wage base expires once you hit like 155,000. You don't pay into Social Security anymore.
Close to 170 now. But
it's 170. Okay,
one more thing, Nick. One more thing.
Okay.
We got to get the savings rate up in this country, and not everybody's covered by a private pension plan. And so one of the other things that the public supported was a supplemental individual account that piggybacks on the concept of the Federal Thrift Savings Plan, where it goes into account with your name, with limited investment options, automatic savings. I don't call it mandatory because people don't like the word mandatory. I call it automatic.
Right.
Unless you're otherwise covered by a plan, and that would be 2 to 3% of pay, and people can afford that. I mean,
right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. In other words, have a 401k style feature.
A super 401k.
Right, they don't. And so why is Congress delaying this? Because the more you delay it, David, the worse things get. This is like a bad disease and you're not fixing it.
Because there's too much laggardship in Washington and not enough leadership in Washington.
Okay. Yeah, Mark.
I can't hear you, Mark.
You're muted, Mark. Mark.
You're muted.
Yep, I'm muting myself. I got an important question. It's what I said I was going to ask earlier because, as y'all can tell, I'm not at my home office. I'm at the cultural center that I work at and everything, because we've got Santa here and a bunch of kids coming and all along those lines. So my question for everybody here on the panel is, have you been naughty or nice, and are you going to be getting good gifts in about 2 days? Because Christmas is literally around the corner. So I'm going to start with you, Dave. Have you been naughty or nice, and are you going to get a good Christmas gift, or do I need to beg Santa for you? Because I'll go beg for you.
I think I've been nice, and I'm very appreciative for God at taking care of my wife and myself, not being injured much worse than otherwise we would have been in the accident a week ago Saturday.
Yes, no doubt.
Amen.
Amen. What about you, Kim and Dick? Have y'all been good?
It depends on who you ask with me, but if you were naughty, odds are they think I was naughty because I fought them back. But I'm like David, I'm thankful for all the blessings I have in my life today, and for the good things that are happening today, even though that we have a lot of things that we have to change. And David, I'm thankful that you're okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Everything's good here. I've moved to Spain, and I've learned what bureaucracy is all about just moving over here, because they have a huge bureaucracy here, but it's very similar to the United States. People don't understand that unless they're over here. Rick?
I'm pretty naughty. I for decades, for my entire life, I haven't lived up to my potential, which is, and I'm a pretty cranky guy. I'm thankful for a lot of stuff, including that you weren't hurt worse. Was it another driver who was driving stupidly?
No, I'll tell you what happened, and they can't figure out why. It was evidently dehydrated, and I felt like that I was, gonna throw up. Okay, and I felt queasy, so I told my wife that I was going to pull over, and she needed to drive. And literally within about 3 seconds of that, I totally passed out, and went off the road into a ditch. The car flipped. It rolled. We went into several trees, took out 60 feet of fence. Okay. And every airbag deployed. And but for that, I wouldn't be here, and by the way, we put down a deposit yesterday on a brand new car that's identical to the one that because it did its job. It did its job very well. But they ran every kind of test you can think of, and the only thing that they can say is I must have been significantly dehydrated, because that's the only thing I think of. So I'll have to take care of that going forward.
That's the number one problem in our country right now, is I think people are not hydrating enough, and I'm forcing myself to do that. But I think that's the majority of our health problems. And thank you for sharing. That's very scary.
Yeah, well, hopefully you're going to be okay, David, because I was wondering, how will the show go on without you? And frankly, it won't.
You just changed the name. You just changed the name.
Change the name. Yeah, but the thing is, everybody likes watching the show. So, we got people, not just in the United States, but from all over the world, who watch Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. And with that, we're going to leave everybody, because we're at the hour, as soon as I can find the exit.
Merry Christmas, happy holidays to everybody.
Yes.
Merry Christmas. We'll see ya.
See you in a couple weeks.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Very good.
Hydrate.